Hi there, this is Kevin Patton with a brief preview of our next full episode. That is episode 32. As usual, in episode 32, we're going to have a few brief content updates and tips, and one of those will focus on inheritance of mitochondrial DNA. Turns out a new discovery suggests that, sometimes Dad's mitochondrial DNA can get in there too. If you want to know more, you're going to have to wait for the full episode and find out. I'm also going to give my super secret tip on how to get past some of those paywalls for journal articles that you might be trying to link to from my show notes or episode page. And this is a way that is absolutely legal and ethical, but it's free. So you want to stay tuned for that too, right? And I'm going to discuss those cardiac stem cells that were discovered a number of years ago, and all kinds of research has been done since then that, we were thinking had the potential to cure some heart problems. But there's been a big major glitch in all of that, and I'll discuss that in the next episode as well. The feature topic, though, is going to be helping students with test anxiety. It feels like test anxiety is something that's out of our hands, and our students feel like it's out of their hands too. It's just this big block that no one can move. But that's not true. There are things they can do, and things that we can do, and things that we can do to help our students see and implement the things that they can do to alleviate test anxiety. And that's going to be the focus of the featured topic in episode 32. The A&P Professor podcast is sponsored by the Human Anatomy and Physiology Society, HAPS, promoting excellence in the teaching of human anatomy and physiology for over 30 years. Did you know that registration for the annual conference next May in Portland, Oregon is open? And did you know that there's a substantial early bird discount? So check that out now at the approfessor.org/HAPS. Well, it's time for some more word dissections, which has become kind of a regular thing in these preview episodes. And our first term is actually a set of two parallel terms, biparental and uniparental. Biparental referring to a process involving two parents, and uniparental referring to a process involving just one parent. And that's going to come up when we discuss mitochondrial inheritance, one of the topics for our full episode 32. And mitochondrial inheritance is thought to be uniparental in all cases. But as we'll find out in that next episode, it can sometimes be biparental. At least that's what the evidence is showing, and you can find out more in our next episode. So dissecting those parallel terms, the only thing that distinguishes them is the prefix. In biparental, it's bi, which you probably already know means two. And in the other term, uniparental, it's uni, which means one. So hence the difference between a one-parent process and a two-parent process. That word part parent, though, comes from Latin as well. And even though it can exist as parent in Latin, that in turn is derived from the Latin verb parare. So that par really is the important part of that word part, parent. And that par word part means to bear or to bring forth, as in parenthood. And then, of course, the al suffix at the end means relating to. So biparental, relating to a process of two parents, and uniparental, referring to a process involving one parent. But there are a lot of related words that we run across. For example, we sometimes refer to the term viviparous and its companion term oviparous in zoology. Vive in viviparous means living. So if something, an animal, is viviparous, it bears live offspring, as opposed to maybe an organism that bears eggs instead of living offspring or free living offspring. So oviparous, ova is a word part meaning egg, as you know. So oviparous means egg bearing. There's also a term multiparous that in a general context, looking at many different kinds of organisms, a multiparous species, for example, would be one that typically has multiple offspring. So that word part multi before the par word part means bearing multiple offspring. But in the context of just humans, usually we just bear one or two offspring, although certainly more is possible. And when we run across those multiple birth situations, we can call that multiparous within the species. A species that typically is not multiparous in general, but those situations are cases of humans being multiparous. Another word part that we run across sometimes in human biology involves the word part partum, as in postpartum. And that partum, I always thought meant, to part with the offspring, or the parent parts with the offspring in the birth process. And so that's where the partum comes from, but it's not. The PAR there means parent, or the bearing process, or the bringing forth process. So postpartum means after the offspring is born, after the offspring is brought forth. Another term that I want to dissect is metacognition, which is going to come up in our discussion of how to deal with test anxiety. And we've talked about metacognition in previous episodes before, but let's break it down. First of all, we're using it in the sense of, well, in its simplest definition, thinking about thinking, or another way of saying that is thinking about the process of learning and knowing. And that starts with the word part meta, M-E-T-A, which means a lot of different things depending on how it's used. For example, it can mean after, it can mean along with, it can mean beyond, it can mean among, it can mean behind. But in this case, it's sort of an application of that literal meaning of beyond, but more specifically in the sense of something that refers to itself or its own characteristics. And so what is it referring to? It's referring to the cognitive part. And cogna is a word part that usually means knowing or thinking, if you extend it a little bit. But even that word part cogna itself can be broken down further into word parts. Co means with, and then the GNI comes from a word that means to learn or to know. And so you put those together, and it refers to the process of knowing or the process of learning or thinking. And then the TION suffix at the end, as we know, means a process. So it's a process of knowing, but knowing about knowing. It's sort of reflected back on itself. The searchable transcript for this preview and for the full episode is sponsored by the American Association of Anatomists, AAA. You can find them at anatomy.org. Well, it's time once again for another recommendation from the A&P Professor Book Club. And this time it's a twofer. I have two books to recommend from the same author, and you're going to be really surprised at what these books are because at first glance, they seem to have nothing at all to do with either anatomy and physiology or with teaching in general. But they do. Just trust me on this. The author for both of them is a guy named Daniel Pink, who has become one of my favorite authors. And he writes on diverse topics, all having to do with human behavior. And the first book that I'll mention is called To Sell is Human. And that's not C-E-L-L, that's S-E-L-L, as in sales and salespeople and so on. To Sell is Human. And the subtitle is The Surprising Truth About Moving Others. And that subtitle may give you a clue as to why in the world a book about sales has anything to do with teaching A&P. And that is, it's about moving others, right? We're trying to move our students to learn effectively. We're trying to move them to get to do even specific tasks within our course. But even beyond that, we try to sell our course to our students, right? We try to sell our program and our college or university to get people to come in. So yeah, part of our job is sales. Even on a day-by-day basis, we're trying to sell our students on whatever it is that we're trying to get them to do, whatever learning outcomes that we want for our students in that lesson or that day, or again, in that course. Now, that's not the first Daniel Pink book I read. The first book I read is what really got me to be a fan of his books, and that is a book called Drive. The subtitle of Drive is The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. So that's why I picked up that book in the first place, is I want to understand motivation better, because I think one very difficult thing, one of many difficult things in teaching a beginning A&P course to undergraduates is to motivate the students. Because even though they might be very motivated about, getting into a health career, they're not necessarily motivated to study all of these bones and bone features that I ask them to learn, or how an action potential works, or how synaptic transmission works, or any of that other stuff. They don't seem very motivated. And so what can I do to get them motivated? When I was an animal trainer, sometimes that wasn't too difficult. With a lion or tiger, you give them a little bit of meat on the end of a stick. That's very motivating. You've done that with a pet, right? Like with your dog or cat or something. There's lots of motivators there. But how do you motivate an A&P student to really buckle down and try to understand synaptic transmission? Well, Daniel Pink says that there are three basic ideas that we can tap into, either to motivate ourselves or to motivate others. The first one is autonomy, the desire to direct our own lives. So how does what I do in the A&P course, how can I enhance that autonomy aspect? Well, there are a lot of things I can do in the way I set up the course to let students make their own decisions and their own timing and so on. There's things I can build in. Even to a very structured course, I can build in some level of autonomy. But I can also point out to students how having that knowledge will make them more autonomous in their careers. So first principle is autonomy. Second principle is mastery. The urge to get better and better at something that matters. Well, that's easy to tie A&P into, right? Because they're going on into these health careers, something that really matters to them. And if I can really clarify that mastering A&P really is mastering the basics of that profession that they want to be a part of, then I've done more to help motivate them. So we have autonomy, mastery. The third general principle is purpose. That is the yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves. Well, whoa, that's like built for A&P, right? Because what are the health professions other than being of service to humanity? In service of something larger than ourselves. Yeah, humanity, I'd say that's larger than ourselves. So purpose is kind of built into why the students are there. So autonomy, mastery, purpose. But don't listen to what I have to say about it. Listen to on an audiobook or read Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. I think it'll really enhance how you approach teaching and even your own learning and professional development. So check the book club page at the approfessor.org, or just go to the links in the show notes or the episode page for this preview. Hey, do you like these preview episodes? Should I keep doing them? Let me know that, or anything else on your mind, at podcast@theapprofessor.org, or leave a message on the podcast hotline at 1-833-LION-DEN. That's 1-833-546-6336. I'll talk to you soon.